All right, the next step in the sequence of activities is designed to introduce the inquiry topic and also to have students apply what they've started thinking about in the evidence ranking and the skill of evaluating evidence to a longer text related to the topic that they will eventually be writing about in their mini analysis. So we're just going to start by having students take a minute to think about where they stand on the issue. So the topic we're exploring is the idea of mandates, nutrition mandates in schools. And we do want to make sure that we're open to and very clear about the fact that students' opinions can change and are likely to change over the course of looking at documents and having conversations. But we just want them to think about where they stand initially. Then they can use that as a starting place for looking at and evaluating evidence. So if you will, we're going to do just that very thing. So I'd like you to go ahead here in just a second and pause the video and take a few minutes with the teachers you are with to talk about where you stand on the issue. So what is your opinion about whether or not there should be mandates on nutrition in schools? And this could include things like minimum requirements for different food types. It could be replacing food in vending machines or snacks in vending machines with healthy snacks. So any opinion you have about whether or not there should be government mandates about nutrition in schools. So go ahead and pause and take just a couple of minutes to talk about that particular topic. So now we're going to go ahead and start looking at our first text that was related to this topic and introduce students to the idea of mining a text with a particular focus on evidence that they could use to support where they stand on an issue. So we're going back to the Joseph Harris moves and that they practiced with in the evidence ranking, thinking about how they could use that evidence there. So as they read this relatively simple text about school lunch changes, they're going to be trying to identify evidence that they could use and put a new spin on it, so how they could do some extending. As an example, to support a claim, some illustrating, to reference an expert so that they can authorize, or things that they want to push back on, that they would disagree with, that they would challenge, or that they could interpret in a different way. So when going through this activity, we want to make sure to start by modeling. So we want this to be pretty highly supported for students. So at least the first part of it, you would go through and model for them as you're reading and think aloud your particular thoughts about the evidence that you're encountering and ways you might use it to support your stance or to kind of help your argument along. And so if you have a document camera, that's great for students so that they can see as you're doing your annotation. You can also just make sure that you talk through what they're writing. And I always remind my students that they want to be sure to do the annotation that I'm talking about so that they can reference back to that when they're doing their own annotation. So the first thing I'd want to do is make sure that each student has printed off a copy of the resource of the USDA school lunch changes. And mine's blank right now because I haven't started modeling the Think Aloud yet. But at the top, I did just write my stance. So where I stand on the issue currently, I am currently in support of nutrition mandates in schools. So just as a reminder there, and that's what I'm going to model is mining this text for evidence that's related to that particular stance. So I'm just going to model for you how I would talk through students the first few paragraphs, just helping them see, given my particular stance, which evidence do I pull out as the most logical and relevant, and how can I make notes about how I could use that, what kind of moves I could make with that particular evidence. So you will want to jot down as I'm going through and talking through this, just like I'd have the students, try to keep track of the same annotation, because the second half you'll be talking in groups with. So you want to have an example of what that might look like. I'm just going to start by reading aloud the first paragraph and then thinking through, my responses to the evidence and what I might use. So Smart Snacks uses science-based nutrition guidelines and practical expectations to try and get kids to choose healthier items. More whole grains, low-fat dairy, fruits and vegetables, and leaner protein are promoted. Foods high in fat, sugar, and sodium are made less available. The plan only affects food sold during the day, and items sold at after-school sporting events or other activities are not included. So there are two pieces of evidence that stand out to me in that particular paragraph, and the first is the sentence with more whole grains, low-fat dairy, fruits, and vegetables, and the next sentence about foods high in fat, sugar, and sodium. So I would use that particular example to illustrate what I'm trying to prove about mandates so that we're providing students with healthier options. So I'm going to put an I, underline that, put an I next to it because I'm thinking that I could use that to illustrate my point. Actually, the last sentence I would also use, and I would point out the limitations of that. I might actually counter that piece of evidence, because I think I would argue if we're going to do this during the school day, we should also do it at all school-related activities. So I'm going to mark that one with a bracket, and then I'm going to put a C next to it to remind myself that I'm thinking I could use that for countering. The next paragraph, before the new standards chocolate sandwich cookies, which are 286 calories, 182 empty calories, fruit-flavored candies, 249 calories, 177 empty calories, donuts, 242 calories, 147 empty calories, chocolate bars, and regular soda would have been allowed. Now students can try peanuts, 170 calories, 0 empty calories, light popcorn, low-fat tortilla chips, granola bars, fruit cups, and no calorie flavored water. So from those two particular paragraphs, I think I would just pull out one example from each to illustrate my point so we can see. So for the first one, I think I would pick donuts, which are 242 calories, 147 empty calories, because I think that that's really high calories and a lot of empty calories. So I'm going to pull that one out. And then from the second one, I'm going to pull out granola bars, which are 95 calories, 32 empty calories. And the reason why I'm pulling that pairing is because I could point out, I think, to illustrate why this is a good idea, that we're just replacing donuts with granola bars, which donuts have really basically nothing valuable to them, and granola bars have some valuable nutrition, and they're really good. So I think I would put an I next to each one of those. And I'm also thinking that maybe I could extend the granola bar as an illustration and just talk about how that's a really great snack and they are still delicious to eat and maybe not as good as a donut, but some things that I still enjoy eating. So I think I'm going to put an I/E next to that because I would extend. So the last paragraph I'm going to model for you. It's important to teach children healthy eating habits that will affect their health throughout their lives. Margot Wooten, the Nutrition Policy Director at the Center for Science and the Public Interest, told Bloomberg Businessweek. It doesn't make sense for schools to teach nutrition in the classroom, then counter it by selling sugary drinks and candy bars in vending machines in the hallway. So I'm going to use that last sentence, and because she's an expert on nutrition, she's the Director for Science and the Public Interest, I'm going to probably use this example to authorize, so to reference the fact that she is an expert. So I'm going to put an A next to that. So once I've modeled that first half, I would probably go into having students help me, so we would do this together for the next few paragraphs, either for my particular stance, or if we want to talk about what our stance is as a class, that would be fine too. So I would just go through each paragraph and have volunteers, point out which evidence we could use and how we might use it. So I'm just going to have you go ahead and do that together now. So if you want to go ahead and pause and then move through the rest of the article doing the exact same thing, read the paragraph, and then identify any potential evidence, and also make sure to annotate for how you might use it so that you can see, as I've been going through, I'm underlining, marking, and then I'm giving, a note on the side about how I would use it. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. So now that you've finished the article, hopefully you've identified some other evidence you could use for a particular stance and how you might use it. The two primary things that I picked out for the rest of the article for my stance were the section where it talks about the final plan being based on 250,000 comments on their proposal. So I would use that to illustrate why this is a good plan and why it's a good idea, and the fact that people have had an opportunity to contribute their thoughts about it. And then I would actually take the last sentence, the last section where it says we need time to evaluate the impact of these changes, and I would want to extend that to talk about how important it is to help to educate students about what the healthy choices are. So we can't just make the changes without also encouraging students to accept those changes. So then you would want to take just a couple minutes, and I would recommend doing this after every article and every source, to have students take a minute to evaluate where they stand on the issue now that they have more information, they have some more evidence to think about. Where do they actually stand at this point in time? So let's do that. Go ahead and here in just a second pause and then talk together about where you stand on the issue now. Do you still stand where you started, or would you change your mind? So we're going to go ahead and move on then to looking at another text related to this topic that is not as directly related to the topic. And the purpose here is really to kind of complicate the issue, because students probably have a pretty straightforward opinion at this point in time, and we want to put something in there that makes it so they look at another perspective and think about things in a different way, and maybe even question their opinion about where they stand right now. So the next text we're going to look at is an infographic called A Tale of Two Meals. And when you print this, it's probably best if you print it on 11 by 17 paper, and if you can print it in color, that's great. If you can't, it's not a big deal. And this is going to be another we do situation where you are going to work through this with students and help them navigate this text, again, with the same purpose of thinking about where they stand on the issue now and how they could pull out evidence that they could use, that they could extend, that they could use to illustrate, that they could use to authorize, or that they could counter. So since this is likely a new text type to a lot of students, I would just want to point out a few features of how to read it before we go through reading it together and thinking about the food. And I would just say, you know, I'm at this point in time, I still have the same stance on the issue. I think that I'm currently in support of nutrition mandates in schools, but the last article made me think that I would also want to say, as long as those are accompanied by education and what's really healthy and helping students understand that. So just to point out a few things about this infographic, I've read through it a few times, and I've actually found that it's best to read kind of both sides at the same time, moving back and forth. So it says, a tale of two meals, what's really making you fat? Imagine that it's time for breakfast. You have two choices, a plate of bacon and eggs, or a bagel with low-fat cream cheese. Which one will make you fatter? Think it's the bacon and eggs? Wrong. And so then I read each side based on the text that's there. So I would read, fat doesn't start breaking down as quickly as other foods. Carbs in your stomach digest faster than most other nutrients. Fat takes a long time to digest. Carbs are used for energy, are digested. So that's a way to navigate this text, kind of moving back and forth between the two sides, which isn't typically how you would read. So as you're doing that, you want to make sure that you follow that pattern and that you're identifying evidence, you know, and also making note of how you could use that particular evidence. So again, this is something I would do with students, but what I'd like you to do is go ahead and do that together. So if you will pause and take a few minutes to go through this infographic and pull out evidence that seems notable given your particular stance, and make notes about how you could use that particular evidence. So you might be wondering why this particular source. Why did I select it, since it doesn't actually talk specifically about mandates, nutrition mandates in schools? And actually it's going back to the original source and what was listed as healthy snacks versus unhealthy snacks. So things like more whole grains, low-fat dairy, fruits and vegetables, and leaner protein are promoted. And we're giving, you know, in replacement of candy and soda and chocolate bars. That what they're suggesting that they should eat are things like peanuts, light popcorn, low-fat tortilla chips, granola bars, fruit cups, things like that. And so the idea here is to have students begin to start thinking about what actually is healthy. If we're going to decide about nutrition mandates in schools, then those are going to be mandates about particular beliefs about what makes things healthy, what is healthy food versus wasn't, what makes us fat and what doesn't. And so the idea here is for this particular infographic to open that conversation, this authentic conversation that's actually happening in the world about what is healthy and what is not. Is it fat that makes us fat, or is it sugar? Is it carbohydrates? You know, how do we decide what's healthy food and what isn't healthy food? And so to finish up this series of activities, we wanted to have students write just really briefly where their stance is now and what is a particular piece of evidence that they could use to support their stance. And so for me, I would write, you know, actually, I'm probably not sure right now about whether or not there should be nutrition mandates in schools, because I'm not sure what actually healthy food is and what should be mandated. So, and it would be okay for students to say that they are unsure, and then what particular evidence would they use. And I would actually cite that section that talks about what healthy foods are in the first article, and then this section that argues that bacon doesn't make you fat, but eating a bagel full of carbs tells your body to keep storing more fat. So that would be where I would end on the issue. So go ahead just to wrap up this series of activities, and you can either write or just talk together about where you stand on the issue based on this pairing of sources.